Welcome to Citizen University TV. I'm Eric Liu. In this second season of our show, we're going to be talking about strategies of power that you can use to make change in our community and our country. There are three aspects to these strategies of power: changing the game, changing the story, and changing the equation of power. And I want to give you a preview of what we're going to be doing all season long, because each one of those three has three strategies within it. To change the game of power means that accepting and realizing that sometimes when people have power, they hoard power, and power compounds. And so if you want to challenge that and change that, you often have to change the game from a winner-take-all situation into something else. Similarly, when it comes to story, you've got to think about the ways in which people who have power justify their power and tell a story about why they have it and why they ought to have it. If you want to challenge that, you've got to change the story. And last of all, with the equation, sometimes power can feel like a zero-sum game, and you're stuck if you don't have it. But we've got to remember that power is infinite, and you can always change the equation, and you can always create new power out of thin air. So over the arc of our season, we'll be talking about these three dimensions, and each one of them has three strategies within it. Today, we're going to focus on one: adjusting the arena, which is the first strategy of changing the game. And what I mean by adjusting the arena is simply this: recognizing that every situation you get into as a citizen, as an activist, as a neighbor, is not fixed and formed and handed down by God. It is a fluid, dynamic situation, and you have the ability to change the parameters of that playing field. That means you can make that field smaller or larger. You can make it an inside game or an outside game. Or you can make it a fight about deep power versus shallow power. So these are the three aspects of adjusting the arena that we're going to talk about today. Let's start with this question of smaller versus larger. When you think about any political fight, sometimes you have to assess whether it's to your advantage or not to bring more folks into your fight, to make it so that more people see your cause as their own. Sometimes it is to your advantage, sometimes it's not. And that's what this variable is about. So for instance, the reaction to President Trump's executive order banning refugees and immigrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries, the reaction to that instantaneously from people all around the country, including here at SeaTac Airport, was to flood in protest, to rally round. And what these activists and citizens did was they said, we're going to expand this arena. We're going to make this a bigger fight. Because the executive order, by its letter, was focused for a specific period of time on a specific group of people from a specific set of countries. What these citizens said was, no, this is a bigger fight about all of us, about principle, about American ideals. And by changing that frame, they enabled a lot more energy to flow into the arena. In another example, think about the fights that have been unfolding in state legislatures around the country, including our own here in Washington, about whether to ban trans people from access to all bathrooms of their choice. Well, for the people who are proposing these restrictive legislation, these bills, they want to shrink the size of the arena. They want to make it smaller. They want to make this just a fight about specific questions of public safety and whether little kids will feel safe going into a bathroom and encountering adults of one kind or another. The opponents of this legislation want to expand the field. They want to make this a bigger argument and a bigger debate, again, about principle, about inclusion, about fairness, and about the kind of society we want to be. That kind of tug and pull about the size of the arena is one that is fluid and ever-changing. The same is true for the second dimension of adjusting the arena, which is the question of whether you want to be playing an inside game or an outside game. There's a couple dimensions to this, too, when I talk about inside versus outside. One is simply, do you want to be playing the game that's about operating behind closed doors, where there's no public scrutiny? Or do you want to throw it wide open in a way where you get the people and you get the attention and the visibility that changes the dynamics of power? The other aspect of inside versus outside is simply how you identify, how you feel. Do you identify as an insider or an outsider? And can you activate other people's sense of identity as one or the other? So let's talk about a couple of examples of this. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, is incredibly effective at the inside game. They control so many state legislatures, including our own here in Washington, and they can make sure that in legislatures, bills that would propose gun reform or gun responsibility never see the light of day. And that's a great closed-door strategy that they've effectuated all around the country. They've shrunken and created this smaller arena. But by making it an inside game, they've also created an opportunity for citizen activists to want to play the outside game, to throw it open to the public. And so the activists behind Initiative 1491 and before that Initiative 594 took the issue straight to the people by ballot measure. And by creating a campaign that went straight to the people and bypassing the inside game of the legislature, they changed and adjusted the arena. In a similar sense, the candidacy of then candidate Donald Trump during the presidential election was about this sense of identifying as insiders versus outsiders. Donald Trump is as insiders come, as a rich New Yorker, and yet his candidacy established a brand of the outsider challenger, the guy who was going to blow up the establishment. And the people who were drawn to him in part because they too identified as aggrieved outsiders who wanted to take down the establishment. And that was a part of the Trump genius during the campaign, activating that sense of outsider spirit and outsider identity. Well, the third dimension of this adjustment of the arena of power is deeper versus shallower power. And here's what I mean by this. In any issue, you can really think about just on a shallow level, accepting what you've inherited and trying to adjust things plus or minus a little bit on the margins. Or you can go deep. You can go to the root of the issue and say, you know what, I want to challenge how this whole thing's being done. So let's talk about some concrete examples. When it comes to police reform, for instance, shallow power would be saying, let's adjust the practices and the training of police officers so that they are more respectful to communities of color. Deep power would be saying, let's actually demilitarize and defund the police. Now, you can have your opinions about one approach or the other, but the fact is that the deep power approach says we're not just going to accept as given what we have right now, we're going to challenge the very premises of policing in this country. The same thing unfolds around taxes in the United States. Shallow power is saying, let's have a debate about whether the marginal rate for high earners in the United States should be X or X plus something else. Deep power is saying, hey, why don't we abolish the IRS? Hey, why don't we eliminate the income tax? That's going more radically and deeply to the core of the issue. Now, in talking about all these dimensions of adjusting the arena, one of the things that's so important is to remember that you've got to know yourself. There is no correct answer. There's no inherently right answer as to whether you should be making the arena smaller or larger, whether you should be playing the inside or outside game, whether you should be doing a deep or a shallow power game. The question is, what do you got? Who are you? What assets do you bring to bear? And I don't mean just you as an individual, but your allies. What forms and sources of power can you activate? What is the context within which you're operating? And reading that context and knowing that, oh, what we've got here is more favorable to an inside game or to an outside game. Or what we have is more favorable to expanding or shrinking the arena. These things will change depending on who you are, but they will also change depending on your own circumstances. And so knowing yourself and knowing the situation is key to playing with these three different dimensions of adjusting the arena. So here in Seattle, what we want to do is take a good look at a particular example of how all three of these dimensions of adjusting the arena play out. And one great living example right now is the fight that's going on over whether to build a new youth detention center.